Turkey's prime minister says the Islamic State group is responsible for the blast in Istanbul that killed 11 people and wounded 15 others. The head of the Jewish community in Marseille urges Jewish residents to avoid wearing the kippah in public areas. And Germany announces plans to make it easier to expel foreign criminals and strip sex attackers of refugee status following assaults in Cologne on New Year's Eve. Good evening. You're watching I-24 News here with the hour's headlines. A suspected member of the Islamic State group is believed to be behind today's blast in Istanbul's central square that killed 11 people, 9 German nationals and 2 South Koreans, injuring at least 15 others. The Turkish prime minister spoke following the attack.
Our fight against IS that carried out this attack will continue with determination. We will not take a step back in our fight against IS. Our resolve will continue as in our fight against all terrorist organizations. I would like to call on the international community. One of the main sources of terror that we face today is the conflict and lapse of security in Syria. Turkey is one of the countries affected from this situation the most. Our good relations with Germany will continue. Most of those who were killed and wounded were German, and I would like to say that Germany is a friendly ally to Turkey, and 78 million of Turks feel sorrow over the death of Germans.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel also reacted to today's attack, saying terror is a challenge faced worldwide.
Today it hit Istanbul, but before that it was Paris, and before that it was Copenhagen, Tunisia, and so many other places. International terror chooses the places of its attacks in different ways, but its target is always the same: our life and freedom and our free societies. Terrorists are enemies of all free people. Yes, they are enemies of all humanity, whether they are in Syria, Turkey, France, or Germany. It is exactly this freedom and our determination to fight these terrorists together with our international partners that will prevail.
And we're joined via Skype by Laura Wells, I-24 News contributor from Istanbul. Laura, thank you for being with us. How are Turkish authorities coping with what is becoming a string of attacks by IS?
Well, certainly there's increased police presence all over Istanbul. And certainly today there's been much more police presence all over Sultanahmet, which really is the main tourist area because of the great number of historical sites there. So they have been taking this seriously. There have been many bomb threats for metros that have been closed in the past few months. And ISIS has struck many times on Turkish soil since early summer. This is something that Turks are very, very frightened of. And they knew that this was going to continue, and certainly it has. The main difference here is that they were striking tourists. Before it was Kurds and also leftists. Now, striking tourists, perhaps specifically Germans, this is really a war on the government now, because this is striking at the very economy. Tourists in particular are the largest group by far that visit Turkey.
And we had some technical problems there. We'll be back with Laura later on. And we're moving on to other world news. Russian President Vladimir Putin has not ruled out granting political asylum to Syrian President Bashar Assad, a longtime ally. In an interview to a German magazine, Putin said it was premature to discuss the issue, adding that Russia had granted asylum to U.S. whistleblower Edward Snowden, which was, quote, far more difficult than to do the same for Mr. Assad. Russia launched a bombing campaign in war-torn Syria in September to support President Assad's army. And in the latest violence reported from France, the body of a Jewish politician, Alain Guzlan, was found riddled with stab wounds in his apartment near Paris. Guzlan's body was found Tuesday morning after his brother called police because he failed to show up at their synagogue, as he usually does every morning. The man's apartment was thoroughly searched, possibly by intruders, and his body showed deep cuts that appeared to have been caused by a knife. Police, as of now, have no leads into his death and its cause. Meanwhile, Jews in Marseille should avoid wearing the kippah in the streets. Zvi Amar, the head of the Jewish community, said there a day after a teenager attacked a teacher who wore the traditional cap. The 15-year-old Turkish citizen of Kurdish origin, who was armed with a machete and a knife, told police he had acted in the name of Islamic State. Amar said Marseille had the third largest Jewish community in France, adding, quote, "On Saturday, for the first time in my life, I will not be wearing the kippah to the synagogue, as not wearing the kippah can save lives and nothing is more important." And to discuss this, we're now joined from Paris by France's Chief Rabbi, Chaim Kurisa. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So Jews are encouraged now to conceal...
Everybody is afraid by the situation in France, but, you know, it's the same everywhere in the world. And I understand that this decision is not decision to stop to wear kippah in the street. It's just a way to tell to everybody that we need brotherhood. We need to be together. We can't accept that it's only Jews have to be quiet and silent. It's impossible to think like this. France is not like this. We are a nation and we are brothers, and we call that in French fraternity. Fraternity is not just a word. I think we need to be careful, but not fearful.
Rabbi Kurisa, was this recommendation made together with the advisory of French authorities?
Yeah, no, French authorities have the right words, the right direction, and it's wonderful. The police, the soldiers, the government, it's wonderful. We need a huge direction of the population. And it's very different. It's what the president of Consistoire of Marseille, Mr. Zviamar, is a wonderful guy, but he waits for a huge reaction of all the population of Marseille, because I think 3 attacks, it's enough. 1 attack, it's enough. And now we just wait for a big reaction of the population. And I think it's coming, because many people call the Consistoire, the Jewish community in Marseille, to say just, I'm not Jewish, but I want to wear kippah tomorrow in my work. It's a wonderful reaction. And we need that. And I call, you know, maybe it's funny, but I think it's very important. It's an act. I call all the supporters of the famous team, Marseille, Olympique de Marseille, soccer team, to wear a hat, not a kippah, a hat. And next Wednesday for the match between in the stadium between Marseille and Montpellier. I think it will be something very important. We are with you. We are like Jews. We think that if we have a hat, we are in the same city. We share your situation.
Chaim Kurisa, the Chief Rabbi of France, thank you very much for being with us this evening. Germany has announced plans to make it easier to throw out foreign criminals and strip sex attackers of refugee status. The decision follows hundreds of complaints of sexual assaults and robberies on women in Cologne on New Year's Eve. Meanwhile, well over 2,000 anti-Muslim protesters took to the streets on Monday to protest. I-24 News' Yoav Borovitz has more.
Germany has announced plans to make it easier to deport foreign criminals and strip sex attackers of refugee status. This as pressure on the government grows following the sexual assaults on women by gangs of young migrant men in Cologne on New Year's Eve.
We are noticeably lowering the hurdles in cases relating to life-threatening crimes, crimes of bodily harm, against sexual self-determination, against property as well, and attacks against police officers. The regulations also include all serial offenders committing property offenses such as shoplifting. A serious reason for deportation already arises if a criminal has been sentenced to a prison term, irrespective of how long that sentence was, and irrespective of whether or not the person is on probation.
A report from the Interior Ministry said a total of 516 criminal complaints had been registered on New Year's Eve, 237 of which were of a sexual nature. A total of 19 suspects have been identified, all of them foreigners.
In this draft legislation, which should spell out sexual assaults and rape, precisely those cases that happened in Cologne are covered. In future, we will also be speaking of sexual assault or rape if a woman was unable to defend herself because a moment of surprise was used. Exactly what happened in Cologne.
Meanwhile, police in the German city of Leipzig made 211 arrests after far-right supporters vandalized buildings and burned vehicles on the fringes of an anti-Islamization rally. Well over 2,000 anti-Muslim protesters took to the streets on Monday, their ranks swelled by anger over the Cologne attacks.
And that's all the time we have. More updates at the top of the hour.
Fights against IS that carried out this attack will continue with determination. We will not take a step back in our fight against IS. Our resolve will continue as in our fight against all terrorist organizations. I would like to call on the international community. One of the main sources of terror that we face today is the conflict and lapse of security in Syria.
Marseille urges Jewish residents to avoid wearing the kippah in public areas. And Germany announces plans to make it easier to expel foreign criminals and strip sex attackers of refugee status following assaults in Cologne on New Year's Eve. Turkey's prime minister says the Islamic State group is responsible for the blast in Istanbul that killed 11 people and wounded 15 others. The head of the Jewish community in
Turkey is one of the countries affected from this situation the most. Our good relations with Germany will continue. Most of those who were killed and wounded were German, and I would like to say that Germany is a friendly ally to Turkey, and 78 million of Turks feel sorrow over the death of Germans.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel also reacted. Good evening. You're watching I-24 News, here with the hour's headlines. A suspected member of the Islamic State group is believed to be behind today's blast in Istanbul's central square that killed 11 people, 9 German nationals and 2 South Koreans, injuring at least 15 others. The Turkish Prime Minister spoke following the attack.
Our